Missions from the West. Christians most likely visited China from the 5th century onward. Traders, members of converted tribes, soldiers of fortune, and possibly even Tibetan Christians visited the re-emerging China of the 6th century. Most of these early Christian visitors were likely from the Greater Church of the East, not from the Western churches of Rome and Constantinople. The Church of the East moved and expanded from the heartland of Persia along the trading networks of the ancient East. As its members traveled, they told of their faith and built modest places for worship. From the 3rd century onward, books and records treasured by Eastern and Western Christians recount that the Apostle St. Thomas had reached India and gone on to China. By the 6th century, Christian churches, bishoprics, and even archbishoprics were well established within a few weeks' journey of the Chinese heartlands. Church documents from the 5th century onward record that the church was in touch with the Chinese. From the formal nature of the commemoration of the mission in 635, however, we can tell that this was the first serious engagement between the church and China. Alibin was almost certainly a monk and most probably a bishop. He appears to have been Persian, judging from his name, and as a priest of the Church of the East, he would have spoken and read Syriac. Indeed, the stone of the Church of the East has Syriac script on it, and just as the Church in India still uses Syriac as a liturgical language, so it would seem the whole Church of the East used Syriac as its sacred language. Alubin is described on the stone as coming from Dakin, the Empire of the West, which usually meant the Roman Empire, or more usually just the West. The Chinese describe this Christian monk as from the West, just as Westerners would have described a Chinese or Japanese or Indian as from the East. The important thing was that Alubin had come to China with a new religion. The Chinese were not that interested in how he got there, nor where he had been before coming to China. The name Alubin, while clearly a Chinese attempt to phoneticize a Syriac religious name, is a mystery. It could be from Alubeno, meaning in Syriac the return of God, or Rabban, meaning teacher. Some think it is a version of the name Adam. It could also be Jabalaha, which means the conversion of God. The Chinese might have dropped the first syllable and provided a classic Chinese ending. Seki, author of the two most important studies on the church in China, in one of which I found the map of Dakin, claims it is a version of Abraham. Based on the terms used in the Chinese descriptions of the mission as engraved on the stone and briefly mentioned in the sutra Let Us Praise, it is clear that Alubin headed a well-planned mission that arrived in 635 and was expected. Someone had been in touch earlier to prepare the emperor for the arrival of this dignitary. The mission was escorted into the capital bearing the first collection of the Jesus Sutras, icons, and other paraphernalia of the faith. It is hard to imagine such an entourage was just Alubin and a couple of servants. In our translations into Chinese of the earliest Jesus Sutras, we found clear evidence that the Church had searched widely and given considerable thought to finding the right ideas, texts, and people to communicate with the Buddhist, Taoist, and shamanic cultures of China. There is no record of this mission. However, in the patriarchal correspondence of the 7th century Church of the East, it is only later in the 8th century that specific references to bishops and churches in China begin to appear. This lack of Western records makes it possible to assume that Alubin and his team were from Central Asia, perhaps Samarkand in present-day Uzbekistan, Herat in Afghanistan, or Merv, also known as Mary, in present-day Turkmenistan. There the church was strong, numerous trade routes and worlds converged, and Indians, Tibetans, Indo-Greeks, steppe peoples, and Persians mixed and exchanged ideas. From there, a team as varied as the 635 mission to China could have been created. From there, too, the many different teachings and books that became the sutras could have been assembled before the mission embarked. Central Asians would have been real social, political, economic, and religious interest in the emerging Chinese empire. The Church of the East and the nations in which it resided and the people it influenced would have wanted knowledge of the empire and alliances, which in those days often were initially attempted through the contacts of missionaries. In contrast, patriarchal headquarters in 7th century Seleucid Ctesiphon, which later moved to Baghdad before fleeing that city in 1924, had been troubled for decades by the war between the Byzantine and the Sasanian empires of the Mid-East. By 632, this conflict had exhausted both empires, and it is unlikely that either would have had the energy or interest to send a mission to China, precisely because the church headquarters had been caught up in what was effectively a war zone. The church farther to the east, especially around the powerful archbishopric in Afghanistan or the church center in Turkmenistan, could have gone its own way. Evidence that such a team came from the eastern edges of the Christian world lies in the Jesus Sutras themselves. These early teaching scripts tell us explicitly that they are early translations of the books brought by Alubin, and they make references throughout to other ancient sacred texts and cultures to help explain these Western beliefs and practices. Besides our physical quest for the origins of the Jesus Sutras, my colleagues and I have also been driven to investigate the Jesus Sutras' literary origins. As a result, we have uncovered a marvelously skillful use of Buddhist, Taoist, Greek, and other scriptures and teachings within the Jesus Sutras that testify to a vital synthesis of cultures and faiths. Certain key Buddhist sutras, such as the Meditation Sutra, or the Kasyapapirvarta, or the Bhavanakrama teachings that form the bedrock of belief and practice, exist only in translation today. This is because the original communities in India where the sutras were compiled were destroyed in the 8th to 11th centuries AD, and their foundational Sanskrit books perished with them. To this day, it is common practice for Buddhist scholars to study Chinese, Korean, and even Japanese translations of ancient Buddhist sutras in search of lost Sanskrit originals. As my colleagues and I translated the Chinese Christian sutras, we began to realize that they preserved their own translations of books whose originals in Syriac, Greek, or other languages had long since disappeared. The Christian communities from which they came, with the exception of the Tamarist and Assyrian churches, have also been wiped out. The Tamarists, who trace themselves back to St. Thomas, the apostle's mission to India of the 1st century, survive in India and in fact have become quite strong in some states. The Assyrian Christians are the last remains of the once mighty Church of the East and are so called by the Western churches to distinguish them from Protestant and Catholic Christians in modern-day Iraq and Iran. Of the other great branches of the Church of the East in places such as Arabia, Tibet, and the steppes, virtually nothing survives. Yet the translated sutras give voice to their beliefs and their efforts to convey them to others. After the official reception of Alubin's mission, according to other historical Chinese sources, the emperor awarded funds and offices in which the delegation could undertake the translation into Chinese of the sutras they had brought and prepare a report to lay before him. This act of imperial patronage is recorded outside the Christian source materials in Song Minju's 11th century Atlas of Chang'an in the following entry. In the northeast of the Aining ward there was the Persian temple. In the 12th year of Chengquan, AD 638, the Emperor Taizong had it built for Alasu, a foreign monk from Dakin. Alaso refers to Alubin, and Persian was another term for Western. There, in a foreigner's enclave, the Christians set about translating the sutras. There, the first Christian monastery in China was built. 12 years later, in 650, according to local records at Luguantai and elsewhere, the Dakin monastery that we discovered was built in the environs of the great Taoist center. The text of the stone claims that thereafter monasteries were built in every province of China. This would mean dozens of monasteries arose. Later, the text refers to monasteries in every major city. The first monastery in Chang'an is evidence that the faith had established itself within a decade or so. In the foreign quarter of Chang'an were more than 100 temples, Buddhist, Taoist, Christian, Zoroastrian, possibly Muslim, and probably Manichaean. Chang'an was a truly cosmopolitan city, and it served the needs of the many trading peoples who thronged its thoroughfares. The founding of the second monastery in the sacred Luguan-Tai precinct tells a very different story. There is no other evidence that any religion, even Buddhism, was allowed in this most major of all Taoist sites. For a Christian monastery and study center to have been permitted and even encouraged in this area shows that the emperor had come to believe that the Christian faith contributed something different and valuable to his country and his power. Luguantai itself had risen in the last 30 years to an immense size, wealth, and power because of its official status as the spiritual origin of the Tang dynasty. The significance of the Christian influence in this Taoist stronghold would be comparable to a new religion being allowed to build a temple within the precincts of Canterbury Cathedral in the Middle Ages, or a new faith being given financial aid and support to build a monastery on the grounds of the White House today. Something important had to have happened to impress the emperor and lead him to grant his new faith its uniquely favored position within the site of his own national and spiritual heritage. Perhaps it was the wisdom of the Jesus Sutras, already being translated, or the lifestyle of the monks that created such a profound influence on the emperor, his court, and his scholars. The early Jesus Sutras. The teachings that the first mission to China of 635 had chosen to take with them present a diversity of cultural voices within Tang Dynasty China, but they also represent the core teachings of Jesus and the Western worldview. Most of the books that the Jesus Sutras used as references have completely disappeared from history outside of their preservation in these few fragile sutras found in China over the past 100 years or so. Yet these teachings reflect the integration of the Jesus story with older traditions and beliefs that produced new versions of the story that had significance to different peoples and cultures. It is likely that all the scrolls of what we call the Jesus Sutras come from the cave at Dunhuang, where they had been sealed in about 1005. At the cave's rediscovery at the end of the 19th century, its contents were scattered through a mixture of adventuring Western explorers who bought scrolls by the sackload and Chinese antiquity robbers and traders who stole or purchased the rest en masse. In 1908, some of the manuscripts were taken to Paris. Others, including the Jesus Sutras, began to surface among antiquities dealers in China and Japan during the 1920s and 30s. Few of the scrolls were properly handled or their contents recorded, and many must have disintegrated en route from Dunhuang to the dealers. All the Christian scrolls, the Jesus Sutras, were purchased by either Japanese or European collectors from antiquities dealers in and around Beijing in the 1920s. Thus, although we can be fairly sure they came from the hoard at Dunhuang, we cannot be certain. It is just possible that a separate Christian library was found by antiquity thieves, and that the scrolls come from there. Sadly, we are unlikely ever to know the exact provenance of the find. The first set of the four were made in or around Chang'an, where Alubin's translators first worked, but the later ones sometimes tell us exactly where they were written. For example, the Sutra Taking Refuge in the Trinity says at the end that it was written in 720 at the Monastery of the West at Shazu in Gansu Province. The earliest sutras present the life of Jesus to people living in cultures where reincarnation and karma were daily issues. They use imagery such as Buddha's and Christ as a raft of salvation and make references to Buddhist ideas of hell. These images and terms adapt the Old and New Testament worlds to those of the Buddha's life and the Tao Te Ching. For example, the four essential ideas in the Sutra of Returning to Your Original Nature are based on the core teachings of the Tao Te Ching, and the term original nature comes directly from the Taoist text Chuang Tzu. The main savior deities of Buddhism, known as bodhisattvas, are pictured seated in some formal place of teaching. This sutra opens in exactly the same way. The Jesus Sutras are translated and interpreted in detail throughout the text. Here I just want to give an overview of what they are and the teachings they convey. 4 of the sutras date from circa 640 to 660 and remain primarily in private collections in Japan. The one that was actually found at Dunhuan in 1908 is now in Paris. We have called the first the Sutra of the Teachings of the World Honored One. In Chinese, the terms used mean the Lokaj Vesta, an honorific title for the Buddha as world teacher. Teaching on Charity, Part 3. It tells us that it was translated into Chinese in 641. Not surprisingly, it is the simplest of the translations, showing that the translators were experimenting with concepts for which the Chinese language did not quite have the right vocabulary. For example, the sutra confuses left and right when translating the phrase, "Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing," thus getting it backward. The two characters from left and right are confusingly quite similar. Likewise, the Golden Rule is so badly translated as to be almost unintelligible without knowing the original. So always treat others as you would like them to treat you. Matthew 7:12. The translation actually reads, "Be good, for others like good people who are good to them, who make goodness back to those who are good to them." The first is also the most orthodox sutra in many ways. Indeed, it is almost certainly based on extracts taken from a book then popular called Teachings of the Apostles, a synopsis of the life of Jesus from the Gospels used throughout the Church of the East for many centuries. But that is now lost except for a few fragments. It is not surprising that this should have been the first book to be translated for the Chinese court. Yet within it are a number of theological surprises showing that the original version of Teachings of the Apostles had already undergone some interesting changes and developments. For example, the Syriac Teachings of the Apostles draws heavily on the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5 through 7. The original in Matthew is, "When you give alms, your left hand must not know what your right hand is doing. Your almsgiving must be secret, and your Father who sees all that is done in secret will reward you." The sutra says, if someone gives alms, he should do it in the knowledge of the world-honored one. Let not your left hand know what your right is doing. Pay no attention to outsiders, but worship the one sacred spirit. The one will become visible to you, and then you should worship only the one. We've named the second the Sutra of Cause, Effect, and Salvation. In Chinese, it is called the First Treatise on the Oneness of Heaven. It is strikingly similar in tone, style, and contents to part of the Indo-Greek Buddhist sutra called the Milindapanha, a teaching about Buddhist cosmology and philosophy thought to have been written between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. In Sanskrit, its title means the questions of King Menander, also known as Milinda. King Menander ruled from 150 to 135 BC and was the most famous of the Greek kings of the region. His name and exploits were even known in Athens during his lifetime. The Milindapanha is a series of discussions between Menander and a Buddhist sage, Nagasena, that deal with classical philosophical issues common to both Theravada Buddhism and Greek philosophy. What is the origin of nature? How do we classify nature? What is it to be human? How does the soul relate to the body? What is true knowledge? How does karma arise? What is reincarnation? Through the philosophical discussion of origins, purpose, and meaning in life, and the relationship between physical reality and spiritual reality, the king is shown to have been converted to Buddhism. The sutra is so Greek and rationalist that many have claimed it is not really a Buddhist sutra at all, yet today it is still highly revered in the canon of the Theravada Buddhists. Whether King Menanda is the Milinda of the sutra and whether he ever converted is a moot point, but certainly by around 60 BC, Greeks with names such as Merodach, Theodorus were dedicating Buddhist temples in the Swat Valley in present-day eastern Afghanistan, northern Pakistan. The book itself says Milinda was king of the Greeks in India. We believe that in the second Jesus Sutra we have found a lost Indo-Greek Christian version of the Milindapana that would have been written and used in the Swat Valley by Christian communities that vanished between the 8th and 10th centuries. The Christian communities in this area drew on both classical Greek and classical Buddhist influences in a region that from the 2nd to the 6th centuries AD was one of the most important and vital Buddhist centers for art, missionary movements, and philosophy, though we know from a report of 196 AD that there were churches in this area. No other example of a Christian text from this region has been found. We have no way of knowing in what language the original book was written. It could well be Greek, because Greek culture was still strong and much admired. Buddhist texts from this area are written in a special script known as Gandharan and have their base in Sanskrit. It is also possible they were written in Syriac, the international language of the Church of the East, though that was usually reserved for biblical and liturgical books, whereas this is a philosophical, cosmological, and psychological book. The sutra, as we have it in the Chinese, opens in a style identical to the Milindapana and uses Greek and Buddhist terms exactly as that text does. It seems to be a deliberate attempt to imitate a book that was highly regarded and used extensively by monks and literate lay people such as merchants and nobles of the old Indo-Greek kingdoms. Yet the text of the sutra had adopted certain elements of the Christian gospel to take into account the existential questions of the peoples of China and Central Asia. In the Buddhist Sutra, a great ruler of one of the most powerful Indo-Greek kingdoms, known for his wisdom, is depicted using philosophical questions, raising philosophical questions and receiving Buddhist answers from a sage monk. In a similar style, the Christian authors of the Second Jesus Sutra write of a ruler who asks comparable questions, but who is given Christian answers. For example, the Milindapana opens the discourse on existence thus: the king said, "He who is born, Nagasena, does he remain the same or become another? Neither the same nor another." The Sutra of Cause, Effect, and Salvation opens. The question is asked: what is the cause of human beings? The answer is: humanity is created by that which can be seen and that which cannot. The Milandapana uses imagery such as the architect of a city, when he wants to build one, first clears the site of the town and then proceeds to get rid of the stumps. This is echoed on the sutra. It is like building a house. The very first thing needed is a place to build. The Milandapana refers throughout to the four elements, earth, fire, water, and wind, as does the sutra, and both discuss the five skandhas, or dimensions of reality, which give the soul the physical space within which to live. First, the Milandapana's version. Then the elder, the monk, repeated the simile of the tree and the seed, and said that the skandhas were so many seeds, and the king confessed himself satisfied. Where there is an eye and also forms, there is sight. This 2, 3, and 3 and 4. The sutra's version: the soul has five skandhas. These are from perception, consciousness, action, and knowledge. Everyone can see, hear, and speak. Without eyes you cannot see. 3, 1 through 4. Even if this sutra did not come from the Indo-Greek areas and was not influenced by the Milandapana, much more study needs to be undertaken to establish its provenance. It is still an important sutra that shows Christianity coming to terms with Buddhism as a major belief system with which it needs to coexist. The third Jesus Sutra may have been translated at the same time as the Sutra of the Teachings of the World-Honored One, or a little later than 641. Discovered in a Beijing antiquities shop in the 1920s, it is now in Japan. This sutra is titled in Chinese, Second Part of the Preaching. We have titled it the Sutra of Origins, as this is what it addresses. Although the sutra itself has little in it that helps us identify in which country it originated, it is concerned with the same themes as the second sutra of Cause, Effect, and Salvation. This third sutra, unlike the first two more overtly Christian texts, may have been compiled from various Christian teaching sources expressly to create a new book, an anthology meant for the Chinese mission. It is significant primarily because in it, for the first time, the translators used Taoist terminology that was to become so important in later sutras. For example, it refers to Yama, god of the underworld, to Qi as the breath of life, and it uses Tao as a term to discuss the Christian way. The last of these early sutras is the Sutra of Jesus Christ. In the Chinese, Jesus is transliterated into what may have been read as Yesu, and Christ is Mishisuo, the Messiah. A compilation of different Christian books, this sutra was produced around 645, about a decade after the arrival of the mission. Its use of Chinese is good, and its understanding of Chinese religion and philosophy is so sophisticated. Its use of portions of the teachings of the apostles makes the core teachings of Jesus more Buddhist in tone. Most important, it includes text and ideas from the Tibetan Church and materials from a book that shows strong Jain or Hindu influences. It is a fascinating mosaic of ideas current within the Church of the East at that time, a collection of writings from the edges of the Christian world. The story of Jesus. The Sutra of the Teachings of the World Honored One tells us that it was written 641 years after Christ was born. Or, as the Sutra puts it, this physical manifestation took place 641 years ago, and now all across the world believe. This date is quite extraordinary because it is clearly based on the 6th century AD BC calendar system created to make the birth of Christ the pivotal point of world history and time. It is a remarkable testimony to the success of the new calendar that the Church in China was using it less than a century after it had been created. The system was invented by a monk, Dionysius Exiguus, in the mid-6th century, and one of its earliest uses was by the British Church, which adopted it in 664. To the best of our knowledge, it was in 641 in China. This is the earliest recorded use of the calendar that has come to define history and time for all world cultures. The Sutra of the Teachings of the World Honored One is a dramatic retelling of the story of Christ and the core of his teachings. It opens and closes with material crafted to make the story more accessible, sensible, and palatable to the Chinese world. As noted earlier, it presents a collection of sayings from the New Testament, primarily taken sequentially from Matthew's account of the Sermon on the Mount, and appears to be based on the popular 2nd century compilation of gospel texts, the teachings of the apostles, originally written in Syriac, beginning with the version of Matthew 6:3 quoted earlier. The sutra then incorporates its version of a section from the Lord's Prayer. Don't hesitate when you pray. Ask first for forgiveness for your sins, and at the same time forgive those who have sinned against you. The heavenly ruler above will forgive you as you forgive others. 1:5-7. Further on is a version of Matthew 6:25-26. Look at the birds in the sky. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they are? Can any of you, for all his worrying, add one single cubit to his span of life? Watch the birds. They don't plant or harvest, and they have no houses to worry about. They do not work, yet are fed and watered and never worry about what to wear, because the one cares for them. You are more important than the birds, so why do you worry? 2:15-17. A fourth adaptation from Matthew follows, 7:3-5. Why do you observe the splinter in your brother's eye and never notice the plank in your own? How dare you say to your brother, let me take the splinter out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own? Hypocrite, take the plank out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. Jesus Sutra version. Look for the best in others and correct what is worst in yourself. Otherwise, it is as if you were trying to take a speck of dust out of someone else's eye, while all the time you had a great beam of wood in your own. We need to get rid of the beam in your eye. 2:19 through 21. For comparison with the sutra's first chapter, the full text of Matthew 6 through 7 from the Jerusalem Bible is included on pages 69 through 73. The sutra goes on to recount the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. As at times the translator seems to present the view that Christ was not actually divine, but a human being of transcendent goodness. For example, at one point the text says, "The Messiah is not the honored one, God. Instead, through his body he showed the people the honored one." 4:12 through 13. Perhaps the writer meant to depict Jesus as a vehicle through whom God worked and was made visible to humanity, or it could just be a poor translation into Chinese of a complex and subtle theological point. It is impossible to tell. The sutra expends a good deal of space recounting and disproving the rumor that the disciples of Jesus had stolen his body, and attributes this rumor to the Jews of the biblical era. This unfortunate prejudice indicates the real tensions that existed between Jews and Christians in the Persian Empire. At this time, and from the 2nd century AD to the 12th century, Judaism was still an active missionary faith that converted tribes in Arabia and rivaled Christianity in states such as Yemen. Despite the fact that any Jews who were in China could not possibly have been a threat to Christianity, the sutra still thunders on this point. As this is a strong theme in the 2nd century teachings of the apostles, it is a further sign that the Syriac book was the basis of the Chinese translation. There follows a piece about the resurrection scene. When the women come to anoint the body of Jesus on the 3rd day after his death, they discover the empty tomb and see a brilliant light. The text continues, "The women went to tell all his other students what they had witnessed. As the first woman, Eve, caused the lies of humanity, so it was women who first told the truth about what happened, to show all that the Messiah forgave women and wished them to be treated properly in the future, for he appeared and confirmed all they had said." 5:31 to 32. A most unusual gloss, but one that explains something of the noted equality of men and women in the Taoist Christian Church in China in the 7th century. The story moves on beyond the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19 through 20, when Jesus sends his disciples out to the world to teach and baptize, to explain the significance of his death and resurrection. "Go, therefore, make disciples of all the nations, baptize them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all the commands I give you, and know that I am with you always, yes, to the end of time." It recounts the story of Pentecost and the early church, with the hardships of the early church, as described in the Acts of the Apostles, as well as the persecutions that took place in Persia. It ends with further reflections on the meaning of salvation as provided for the world by Jesus' incarnation. This first sutra is the most clear and conventional Christian account of the gospel and of Jesus' life in the Jesus Sutras. In trying to tell the story straight, basing it on Western concepts and understandings of the world, however, the early Christians in China ran into a major problem. What was the existential issue or question that Christ had come to solve? The Chinese world believed in karma rather than sin, in repeated rebirth rather than the nothingness of hell or Hades of the classical Western views of what came after death. To reconcile the two outlooks, the Taoist Christians would eventually make profound theological adaptations. The first sutra, the Sutra of the Teachings of the World Honored One, 3rd part, Chapter 1. The World Honored One said, "If somebody gives alms, they should do it in the knowledge of the World Honored One. Let not your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Pay no attention to outsiders, but worship the one sacred spirit. The one will become visible to you, and then you should worship only the one. Don't hesitate when you pray. Ask first for forgiveness for your sins, and at the same time forgive those who have sinned against you. The heavenly ruler above you will forgive you as you forgive others. If you have a treasure, do not store it on earth where it can decay or be stolen. Instead, present it to heaven where it will not rot or be stolen. Chapter 2. People think there are two important things under heaven. The first is God, and the second is money. If you have no money, you won't have food or clothing. You'll be as anxious for your family as if they were a child attacked by robbers, anxious about their security. I say to you, seek just one thing. There is only one sacred spirit who forgives all. If you need clothing, you will be clothed. Don't worry about these things. The one knows what you need. If a disciple of the One makes a request to God, it will be granted. All ultimately belongs to the one sacred Spirit. At birth, everyone is given a heavenly soul and the five attributes, and at the appropriate time, food, drink, or clothing is provided. The sacred spirit has no need of these. Watch the birds. They don't plant or harvest, and they have no houses to worry about. They do not work, yet are fed and watered, and never worry about what to wear, because the One cares for them. You are more important than the birds, so why do you worry? Be aware of your own qualities and how they relate to others, especially what you see as their failings. Look for the best in others and correct what is worst in yourself. Otherwise, it is as if you were trying to take a speck of dust out of someone else's eye, while all the time you had a great beam of wood in your own. We need to get rid of the beam in your eye. Tell the truth in all circumstances, but do not cast truth before swine, because they cannot appreciate it. Doing so won't bring you any benefits, and may rouse them to anger. Don't you know this? Ask the One, and you will receive. Knock on the door, and it will be opened. Anybody who sincerely asks something of the one sacred Spirit will receive it. Knock, and the door will open. But if you don't receive what you requested, or the door is not opened, it is because what you asked for isn't right for you. No matter how hard you ask, you won't be given what is bad for you. If you ask your father for food, you will get food. But if you asked for a stone, you would be wasting your time and would never be given it because it is not right. If you ask for a fish, you will receive it, but if you request a serpent, you will be poisoned, so you will not be given one. If ordinary people make decisions like this because they love you, how much more will your Father, the compassionate one, do also? He is the one who decides, maybe yes, maybe no. There are two issues here. Parents decide what is appropriate for their children. The one decides not on what is wise or unwise, but only on the basis of who is righteous and who is not. They cannot be reconciled. Those above help those below. But if you don't receive what you ask for, it will be for good reasons. You cannot be given things that are wrong for you. Act toward others as you would have them act toward you, and do for others what you would have them do for you. Don't follow the evil way, but go the way of the King's entrance and find heaven. Few have achieved this. Others travel the broad path and have a great time, but it leads to the earth prisons. Chapter 3. Some will try to teach you bad ways, but good and evil can be told apart. It is not for the reason that the law has been revealed. The Messiah knew all this and acted accordingly. He shone brightly for 3 years and 6 months. He was a student at home until he was killed by being hung on high. There was a Jew who had been a follower, but then sent his hand against him. The Messiah predicted his death 3 days beforehand. Any who wish to live after death and go to heaven can now do so. The Holy acted in a short time to show people what to believe. He taught over 3 years and 6 months, after which it is a matter of believing yourself. The Jews trapped him, and he spoke of his understanding of who he really was. He said, I am the Messiah. They said, how dare he say this? He is not the Messiah, not the true Messiah. He is mad and should be arrested. Can you do this? He went to Bethlehem. This was in the time of Caesar. Even if Caesar had not arrested him, he could not have avoided death. He was arrested and tried according to the strict law of the land, and hung up on high. Judged by the law, he was condemned to be hung up on high. Caesar said, "You people say he must die according to the law because of what he said concerning who he was in himself." They said, "Who in truth can say, 'I am the world-honored one'? This must stop." Chapter 4. Such deceit and problems are not unique. This is how the story has always gone. The first man is the one from whom we all descend. Is it not from his faults that our faults arise? Who can say, "I am the world-honor one"? Wouldn't people see through that straight away? The first man disobeyed the honored one's command and ate freely. The effect of this disobedient act, eating freely, was a change of heart. He began to see himself as able of being equal to the Lord, as enlightened as the world-honored one. As a result, he was no longer in accord. Anybody who says, "I am a god," should die. The Messiah is the honored one. Instead, through his body, he showed the people the honored one. He showed the holy transformation beyond all previous reckoning. What he brought was not from being human, but came directly from the honored one. He showed love to all around him, but the tempter tempts, and this causes problems. This is why the teachings were brought. As a lamb goes silently to be slaughtered, so he was silent, not proclaiming what he had done, for he had to bear in his body the punishment of the law. Out of love he suffered, so that what Adam had caused should be changed by this. While his 5 attributes passed away, he did not die, but was released again after his death. Thus is it possible for even those who fail to live after death. Through the holy wonders of the Messiah, all can escape becoming ghosts. All of us are saved by his works. You don't need strength to receive him, but he will not leave you weak and vulnerable, without life breath. Through the motions of the law he was hung on high at the appointed time. At that moment the earth shook and the mountains erupted. The stone rolled away, and the beautiful cloth that hung there was ripped in two from top to bottom. As a result of this holy event, the virtuous and blessed dead rose from their tombs, and the dead walked abroad, seen by many. He was with them for 14 days in 1 month. Not a single day passed without him seeing him. 3 days had passed since the holy event. People cannot see when they dwell in darkness. They can only see and hear when the holy event opens their ears and eyes. Because the Messiah was hung up on high, he begged to be given firm existence again. It is all as written. There was a man who was related to the Messiah. He served the world-honored one and was called Yauxi, Joseph of Arimathea. He was a judge of the law of the land, and he asked for the corpse. He wrapped him in a new cloth and buried him in a fresh graveyard where a new tomb had been carved into the side of a mountain. A huge stone was rolled in front of the tomb and a seal stamped upon it. The Jewish men who placed a guard, he said he would rise from the dead after 3 days. Beware, his students will come for his body. They must not be allowed to steal it and then go telling everyone he is alive. As a result, the Jewish men guarded the tomb for 3 days, watching the sealed place carefully. There were female followers of the Messiah, and these women all saw the following. By the tomb stood a flying immortal sent by the world-honored one, and dressed in white as snow. He appeared by the guards coming down from heaven to stand beside the great stone. The guards went into the tomb but could not find the body. The flying immortal told them to go and tell the Jews what they had seen. The Jews bribed the guards to keep silent about what they had seen, but the guards spoke of what the one had done, that the Messiah had risen from the dead. Some women followers, obeying the law, came to where the tomb was. A number of Jews also came at dawn on the 3rd day to the same place. It shone with bright light, and the Messiah had gone. The women went to tell all his other students what they had witnessed. As the first woman caused the lies of humanity, so it was woman who first told the truth about what had happened, to show all that the Messiah forgave women and wished women to be treated properly in the future. For he appeared and confirmed all they had said. He came to them all at their place of prayer, so that his students, and then the whole world, should know the truth. Everyone who saw it went away talking of this. His disciples knew what to do. He told them, "Go out and teach everyone. Baptize them in water and sign them in the name of the Father, Son, and the pure wind to observe everything I have taught. Know this, I shall be with you until the end of time." Chapter 6. It is revealed that the Messiah remained here for 30 days after he had risen from the earth. He taught, "You have authority over all living things and will be understood by all." He promised that the pure wind would come from heaven on those that asked. He was seen in a bright light, and then he went into heaven. A mighty compassionate wind came with true kindness to perform the great and holy transformation. Everyone saw this. But evil spirits were roused to evil actions and maliciously attacked all that humanity had been given, throwing everything down to the ground, destroying all that had been gained. The world-honored one was distressed, and the evil spirits raised their hands against the people, causing terrible suffering and driving them away from the world-honored one. Yet all who have faith will be saved. Those who have no faith, this is because the evil spirits make it impossible for them to see. Everyone can see the enlightenment. The true law brings the religion to those who trust, so have no fear, not even of death. You will live as the Messiah lives. Those who believe will be raised after death from the yellow springs, the afterlife. Every one of them, 10 days after the Messiah ascended to heaven, he sent the pure wind upon his disciples. From heaven he observed the enlightenment the pure wind brought to his disciples. It came as fire upon them. Through the pure wind they were inspired to go out and take the true faith to all. They took the teachings of the Messiah and helped people see the world-honored one, who sent the one from the Father to come down from heaven. This was the Holy One, the one who suffered for us and brought us freedom. He died, but after 3 days he escaped from the hold of death through the action of the world-honored one's key. Nothing like this has ever been heard of before. Chapter 7. Everything in the world has been created for the Messiah. Before him nothing had ever heard of the dead returning to life. Through this law all can be raised back to life from the yellow springs to live forever after judgment. Every living thing will be judged. Those who accept the words of the Messiah will live in his realm. Worship the world-honored one, and you will dwell with the Messiah and the Father in the heavenly palace. This will be such joy and happiness, nothing will pass and nothing will change. The one who was sent by the Father, the world-honored one. If you do not worship him, you will end up worshiping evil spirits. You will be impure and unclean, and you will be dragged into the darkness of the earth prisons. From there you cannot return to the good place, but must dwell with the great evil ghost, Satan. To show enlightenment, he descended from heaven and taught the true religion so truth would prevail. His disciples were not just men, but were created anew by the world-honored one. In the name of the Messiah, these disciples healed and tended to the sick. The great evil ghost called Pato, who lives on the dead, turned the world against the disciples and stirred up trouble for them. He pursued the disciples across the face of the earth. They even seized the Jews. He instituted terrible persecutions of both young and old. Bethlehem is in the land of the Jews, that is, in the west, and here even the king turned against the truth, saying that he was Lord. The Jews were defeated, many killed or scattered across the world, helping to make more disciples for the Messiah. Those who declared for the world-honored one and served the world-honored one were hated, yet most people just wanted to continue to believe. Most of the Messiah's disciples were martyred, and their nation was destroyed. Consequently, many followed with greater enlightenment and saw the true way. This holy event was for all on earth and came from the world-honored one. People need to do right and avoid wrong. The world-honored one seeks to save all. This is what all the kings and founders of holiness have sought. But in Bethlehem and in Persia the believers were killed and evil laws passed against them. Those who protested were destroyed. Those who survived in Bethlehem did so only because of the world-honored one. The evil ghost spirit makes people create false deities, but the world-honored one sent the Messiah. The world-honored one caused the holy event to touch many throughout the world. Thus did all become clear and falsehood disappear. Seeing this, the Messiah came down from heaven. This physical manifestation took place 641 years ago, and now everyone across the world believes. All can see what has been achieved. You may have been taught that people cannot save themselves. This is why the heavenly honored one sends the spirit force to all places to save everyone. It goes to all that live and teaches the truth. This is different from what the various deities and spirits do. Chapter 8. The Messiah chose ordinary people to be his disciples. The true religion comes from heaven, and I teach it. Know this, this is not the way of the holy founders and kings. They chose their disciples from the rich and powerful and control things through petty people. The Messiah follows the true law of prayer and liturgy. All will be done, and everyone will know that this is what the one sacred Spirit wills. The holy law is of the house of the one sacred Spirit. The one sacred Spirit will save anybody who wants to be saved. The soul returns to heaven if it obeys the path of the law, that is, not to trick people, fool or deceive, and not to say false things or do wicked acts. This is the law. Those who wander from the true way are sinful and follow not the path of the one sacred Spirit, but rather a false way. It is possible to return to the truth, though for the world honored one can bring you back. There is no other true way that people can walk, and any other way is judged to be false. Its followers are as bad as those who worship the sun, moon, stars, or even the fire gods. They follow the evil spirits and will go to the fiery earth prisons forever. This is because they need greater faith. If they don't follow the one sacred spirit, they will dwell with evil spirits and other hell dwellers and ghosts. This is as written in the Sutras, drawn from the true law teachings of the one sacred spirit. When the time comes for all life to end, evil spirits will seize people and judgment will come from heaven for all to see. All that is wrong will increase. This is why the one sacred spirit took a body and came teaching, saying, I am the Messiah. For 3.5 years I came. For 3.5 years I struggled with the wicked deeds of the evil ones, and everyone could see this clearly. Now act virtuously, and those who have no faith will be unable to withstand the judgment of the heavenly honored one. These are the evil ghost spirits. All this the Messiah and the one sacred Spirit watch closely from heaven. When the world ends, the dead will be raised and judged. Those who believe the teachings, who act virtuously, and whose hearts follow the true way will go to heaven. There you will be happy forever. Those who know of the true way of the one sacred Spirit and have read the good book, but do not follow this or the one sacred Spirit's commands, will dwell with evil spirits and ghosts in the earth prisons and serve the evil ghosts forever. In these earth prisons they will suffer in a great fire which burns without end. Listen to this, you who wish to be saved. Know that what you have heard is true. If there is anybody not willing to receive this grace, think on your soul and body and their fate. Anybody displeased who does not listen will be cast out and dwell forever with the evil spirits in the earth prisons. Matthew 6. Be careful not to parade your good deeds before men to attract their notice. By doing this, you will lose all reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give alms, do not have it trumpeted before you. This is what the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets to win men's admiration. I tell you solemnly, they have had their reward. But when you give alms, your left hand must not know what your right hand is doing. Your almsgiving must be secret, and your Father who sees all that is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not imitate the hypocrites. They love to say their prayers standing up in the synagogues and at the street corners for people to see them. I tell you solemnly, they have had their reward. But when you pray, go to your private room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in that secret place, and your Father who sees all that is done in secret will reward you. In your prayers do not babble as the pagans do, for they think that by using many words they will make themselves heard. Do not be like them. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him, so you should pray like this. Our Father in heaven, may your name be held holy. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we have forgiven those who are in debt to us. And do not put us to the test, but save us from the evil one. Yes, if you forgive others their failings, your heavenly Father will forgive your sins. But if you do not forgive others, your Father will not forgive your failings either. When you fast, do not put on a gloomy look as the hypocrites do. They pull long faces to let men know they are fasting. I tell you solemnly, they have had their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that no one will know you are fasting except your Father who sees all that is done in secret. And your Father who sees all that is done in secret will reward you. Do not store up treasures for yourselves on earth, where moths and woodworms destroy them, and thieves can break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The lamp of the body is the eye. It follows that if your eye is sound, your whole body will be filled with light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be darkness. If then the light inside you is darkness, what darkness that will be! No one can be the slave of two masters. He will either hate the first and love the second, or treat the first with respect and the second with scorn. You cannot be the slave of both God and of money. That is why I am telling you not to worry about your life and what you are to eat, nor about your body and how you are to clothe it. Surely life means more than food, and the body more than clothing. Look at the birds of the sky. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they are? Can any of you, for all his worrying, add one single cubit to his span of life? And why worry about clothing? Think of the flowers growing in the fields. They neither have to work or spin, yet I assure you that not even Solomon in all his regalia was robed like one of these. Now if this is how God clothes the grass in the field, which is there today and thrown into the furnace tomorrow, will he not much more look after you, you men of little faith? So do not worry, do not say, what are we to eat, what are we to drink, how are we to be clothed? It is the pagans who set their hearts on all these things. Your heavenly Father knows you need them all. Set your hearts on his kingdom first and on his righteousness, and all these other things will be given you as well. So do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Matthew 7, do not judge, and you will not be judged, because the judgments you give are the judgments you will get, and the amount you measure out is the amount you will be given. Why do you observe the splinter in your brother's eye, and never notice the plank in your own? How dare you say to your brother, let me take the splinter out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own? Hypocrite, take the plank out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls in front of pigs, or they may trample them and then turn on you and tear you to pieces. Ask, and it will be given you. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For the one who asks always receives. The one who searches always finds. The one who knocks will always have the door open to him. Is there a man among you who would hand his son a stone when he asked for bread, or would hand him a snake when he asked for a fish? If you, then, who are evil, know how to give your children what is good, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So always treat others as you would like them to treat you. That is the meaning of the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, since the road that leads to perdition is wide and spacious, and many take it, but it is a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you disguised as sheep, but underneath are ravenous wolves. You will be able to tell them by their fruits. Can people pick grapes from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, a sound tree produces good fruit, but a rotten tree bad fruit. A sound tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a rotten tree good fruit. Any tree that does not produce good fruit is cut down and thrown on the fire. I repeat, you will be able to tell them by their fruits. It is not those who say to me, Lord, Lord, who will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the person who does the will of my Father in heaven. When the day comes, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, work many miracles in your name? Then I shall tell them to their faces, I have never known you. Away from me, you evil men. Therefore, everyone who listens to these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible man who built his house on rock. Rain came down, floods rose, gales blew and hurled themselves against that house, and it did not fall. It was founded on rock. But everyone who listens to these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a stupid man who built his house on sand. Rain came down, floods rose, gales blew and struck the house, and it fell, and what a fall it had. This, the most clearly biblical of all the Jesus Sutras, already shows signs of both the problems of translating classical Christian thought into Chinese, as well as signs of adoption of certain Chinese ways of thinking. It stands as the most orthodox of the sutras, yet shows signs of the beginning of a shift from classical Western Christian orthodoxy. It is the doorway into the extraordinary adventure of the Church in China 1400 years ago. It is time now to go right back to the start of the Christian story itself, to the world of early Christianity, both the physical and the spiritual world. Chapter 3, Panorama of the Early Christian World. So God caused the cool breeze to come upon a chosen young woman called Mo Yan, who had no husband, and she became pregnant. The whole world saw this and understood what God had wrought. The power of God is such that it can create a bodily spirit and lead to the clear, pure path of compassion. Mo Yan gave birth to a boy and called him Yesu, who is Messiah. 5:1-4. This passage, so similar to the Gospel in its description of the Nativity, describes the paradox at the heart of Christianity, the birth of Jesus, Son of God, Son of Mary, from the Sutra of Jesus Christ. It was written in China in the 7th century. To begin to understand the meaning of the Jesus Sutras, we need to understand the physical and spiritual worlds from which they arose. The Sutras' cultures of origins are in the West, from where the monks who brought them came. We will trace the physical and metaphysical journey, not just of the monks and the Church of the East, but also of the ideas, beliefs, and teachings that are to be found in the Jesus Sutras. For from classical Western Christianity to the Taoist Christianity of the Jesus Sutras, we travel not just through many countries and cultures, but also through engagements with many faiths. This is a journey in time, belief, and distance that moves from the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean to bring us ultimately back beneath the pagoda of Daqin, 50 miles southwest of Xi'an, China, fast up against the mountains. The political geography. The world within which the events leading to the foundation of Christianity in China took place was very different from the modern world. Past names of venerable countries of Europe and Asia, such as Mercia, Phrygia, Gandhara, and Sugdiana, have now disappeared. Ancient cities such as Antioch and Palmyra have come and gone. Others, such as Byzantium, later named Constantinople, then Istanbul, and Alexandria, Arakan in present-day Afghanistan, now called Kandahar, have changed their names 2 or 3 times. In the 2,000 years since the birth of Jesus, cultures have reinvented themselves over and over again. Religions and beliefs have evolved, influenced kingdoms, inspired artists, changed history, and vanished. The rugged remains of Hadrian's Wall in the north of England, built circa AD 122, gave a palpable sense of the scale and power of the Roman Empire. Even after nearly 2,000 years, the wall still strides out across crags and through bogs. The military road that served the wall is still a road today, and the outlines of the forts and houses built by the legions can be clearly seen. This was an empire that left its mark over hundreds of years of existence. The West, that is, most of Europe, Turkey, and the region traditionally known as the Middle East, and most of North Africa, was largely under the control of Rome from the time of the birth of Jesus until the 7th century. The Roman Empire stretched south from Hadrian's Wall, today close to the border of Scotland and England, down through Spain to modern-day Morocco, from Morocco across North Africa, past the ruins of Carthage, to Egypt, including present-day Algeria and Libya. From Egypt it moved north through the current countries of Israel and Jordan, even reaching at times deep into present-day Iraq. The whole of what today is Turkey formed the great eastern bastion of the empire, sometimes reaching up to modern-day Armenia. The empire also encompassed most of present-day Europe, Bulgaria, Romania, much of Hungary, Austria, southern Germany, the whole of Greece, the former Yugoslavia, Albania, Italy, Switzerland, France, Belgium, and much of the Netherlands. At its height, the empire was ruled from its original heartland, Rome, the greatest city in the West, until the rise of Constantinople in the 4th century AD. Yet even at its greatest, Rome was smaller than its eastern counterpart, the capital city of China, Chang'an, near which the modern city of Xi'an, capital of Shanxi province, now stands. By 635, when the first Christian mission reached China, the capital of the Roman Empire was Constantinople. Symbolically and pragmatically straddling the boundary between Europe and Asia, Constantinople was the largest and most powerful Christian city in antiquity. Yet even by the start of the 7th century, when Constantinople was at the height of its power and influence, the Roman Empire had shrunk considerably. Britain had been abandoned in the early 5th century. Spain and much of North Africa had fallen to the Visigoths and Vandals in the early 6th century, and the Holy Land fell to the Arabs between 635 and 640. The western parts of the empire, England and Wales, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, southern Germany, Spain, and Portugal, Switzerland, and the north of Italy, were all under non-Roman barbarian control, though many of the barbarian tribes had converted to Christianity. The empire had retreated towards its new capital and was barely holding on to the northern coast of Africa. Its strength came from the area of present-day Turkey, Greece, the former Yugoslavia, the Middle East, and Egypt. In the areas of present-day Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan, the Sasanian Empire ruled from AD 226 to 642. The Sasanian Empire, sometimes incorrectly called the Persian Empire, took its name from King Sasan, who ruled northern India and Afghanistan in the 1st century AD, and whose descendants invaded Persia. The Sasanian heartland was the old area of the ancient Roman Empire's greatest foe, the Parthian or Persian Empire, which ruled the region of present-day Iraq and Iran from 247 BC to AD 226. To the east of this heartland of old Persia lay a hodgepodge of kingdoms and states that in the first few centuries of the Christian era encompassed a staggering mixture of peoples and traditions. These included much of present-day eastern Afghanistan, Pakistan, the northern edges of India, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and southern Kazakhstan. Some of these kingdoms were ruled by tribes from the Mongolian and Central Asian steppes, and some were the fragile remains of the Greek states established by Alexander the Great in the 3rd century BC. These ancient countries, now defunct, such as Gandhara, Bactria, and Sogdiana, had produced a strange mixture of Greek artistic style and lifestyle combined with Indian, steppes, and tribal Afghanistani life. Suspended between East and West, they played a significant part in the story of the creation of the Jesus Sutras. Today, the Gandharan culture is best remembered for having created the two towering 6th century Buddhas that the Afghan Taliban destroyed with missiles in 2001. The Bamiyan Buddhas, as they were known, were cut into a mountainside about 100 miles west of Kabul, where they rose to 175 and 200 feet. They overlooked a valley where some 1,500 years ago the trade route between China and India flowed, bringing together languages and religions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and later Islam. These monumental Buddhas, rare for their size and age, rose out of a combination of different artistic styles from India, Persia, and Greece that coexisted in the kingdom of Gandhara. The Buddha's tragic destruction leaves the sculptures of the Dakin monastery in the position of being the oldest example in the situ of the fusion of East-West influences in religious art. By the 7th century AD, many of these ancient kingdoms and states had become part of the Sasanian Empire. To the south of the heartland of the empire lay the vast unknown of Arabia, where tribes moved in a world all their own, occasionally coming into contact with the edges of the great empire of Rome and Sassania. Some tribes had become Christians, some had converted to Judaism. Others were traditionalists or pagans who worshipped an array of deities in the strange shrine of the Kaaba in Mecca, which was built at some time in prehistory to house a meteorite. It was the focus of the many tribal deities of Arabia from time immemorial until Muhammad captured the city in AD 630, upon which he had all the tribal deities removed. Until the very year of the first Christian mission to China, 635, Arabia had been so divided that it posed no threat to the great empires that bordered it. But in 635, Arab armies united under their military leader, Khalid ibn Walid, known as the Sword of Allah, burst out of Arabia and began one of the most astonishing conquests of history. Within 100 years they had conquered the heartlands of the Sasanian Empire and much of the Roman Empire, including the Middle East, all of North Africa, and Spain. To the Far East, to present-day Tibet and China, even 1,000 years before Marco Polo's visit in the 12th century, travelers by the thousands had made their way. From around the birth of Jesus until the 3rd century, this region was dominated by Han Dynasty China, one of the longest-lasting empires the world has ever seen, 206 BC to AD 220. Its last 200 years were marked by gradual decline, ending in brutal civil war. Han China occupied much of the area of southern China, but had no lands west of the edge of the Tibetan Plateau, the western half of the present province of Sichuan. Nor did it occupy the huge region of modern northwestern China, the present province of Xinjiang, and northern region of Inner Mongolia. Between Han China and Rome stood the Sasanian Empire, the Greek-founded states of Gandhara, Bactria, and Sogdiana, and the bulk of the emerging Tibetan Empire. Periodically, the region of present-day Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang was invaded by tribes of nomads sweeping down from the Central Asia steppes in Mongolia. These were, among others, Huns, Kushans, White Huns, Uyghurs, Turks, and Khitans. Some of these eventually settled, intermarried, and disappeared from history. Others were dislodged by the next wave of steppe peoples or by Chinese, Persian, or Arab forces and moved on, some to appear in Europe 100 years later. When the first Christian mission arrived in China in 635, the Tang dynasty had recently arisen out of more than 400 years of petty states, civil war, and short-lived dynasties. China was at its greatest extent ever, stretching from its present-day territories as far west as Sogdiana and Fergana, western-day Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and much of Uzbekistan. The Silk Road ran through this corridor from China proper via the mountain passes to the west of Mongolia to the legendary cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Tashkent. Along the Silk Road traveled convoys carrying silk to the west and returning eastward with gold, silver, and other treasures. Starting in Chang'an, the capital of Tsang China, the Silk Road went northwest from the most western outpost of the Chinese Empire, passing on through the Sasanian Empire to the Roman Empire and Constantinople, or to the great trading center and clearinghouse of Antioch in the Roman province of Syria. Below the long western arm of Tang dynasty China lay Tibet and India. The Tibetan Empire, at the time of the first Christian mission to China, was huge, stretching from present-day northern India and Pakistan to the edges of the old Greek states of Gandhara, Bactria, and Sogdiana. A mighty empire, it reached more than 200 miles east into what is present-day China proper, above present-day Tibet, and north to penetrate deep into the modern Chinese province of Xinjiang. India from the 1st to 5th century AD was an ever-changing mass of petty kingdoms, some of which condensed into one mighty empire, that of the Guptas, who from the start of the 5th century ruled or controlled much of present-day Afghanistan, all of Pakistan, the whole of northern India, and much of eastern India. Above the western arm of Tang dynasty China lay the Badlands. There in present-day Mongolia and Kazakhstan, tribes rose and fell, forever pushing outward toward the great empires of China, Tibet, and Persia, or onward to the Roman Empire. These tribes, such as the Uyghurs, Turks, Khazars, and White Huns, were never united into any great force until the rise of Genghis Khan in the early 13th century. However, distinct tribes were often powerful enough to seize control of much of northern China or to seize ancient kingdoms such as Sogdiana or Bactria, sweeping in and out of the history and geography of Central Asia, China, and Persia. The geography of the mind. The physical geography of the regions through which the monks and their sutras passed is important, but we must also explore the geography of the mind, the conceptual worlds of the peoples who inhabit this history. The thought worlds of these old countries at first may seem familiar, but they prove to be even more remote than the physical and political landscape they once occupied. Early Christian beliefs and practices existed in a chaotic world in which the first Christians struggled to define themselves and their traditions. Their diverse and often competing worldviews can still be discerned today in the major divisions of the Catholic, Orthodox, Coptic, and Syrian traditions. The heart of Christianity is the life and teachings of Jesus. The early church came to believe that Jesus was both divine and human. To them, he was one of three divine persons who made up the Trinity, the others being God the Father and the Holy Spirit. God became human, said St. Athanasius, of the great teachers of the early church in the 4th century, in order that humanity could become God. The life and teachings of Jesus the life and teachings of Jesus promised Christians a new life of the Spirit, a kingdom of God on earth. According to St. Luke, this new life means a society of justice, compassion, and liberation from poverty and oppression in this life. He tells us that at the start of Jesus' 3-year ministry, when he was about 30, he expressed this vision in his home synagogue at Nazareth. Given the scroll to read the portion of Scripture for the day from Isaiah, Jesus quoted, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, for he has anointed me to bring the good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives, sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim a year of favor from the Lord." He then rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the assistant, and sat down, and all eyes in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to speak to them. This text is being fulfilled today even while you are listening. Luke 4:16-21. Having taught that the kingdom of God is within every man and woman, and having profoundly disturbed the culture in which he lived with his teachings, Jesus was persecuted and killed. As the Gospels of the New Testament report, after being crucified, he rose again from the dead to bring salvation and hope to the world. 600 years later, when the story of Jesus was told in China, the Jesus Sutra, known as the Sutra of the Teachings of the World-Honored One, see Chapter 2, described the sacrifice that created Christianity. As a lamb goes silently to be slaughtered, so he was silent, not proclaiming what he had done, for he had to bear in his body the punishment of the law. Out of love he suffered, so that what Adam had caused should be changed by this. While his 5 attributes passed away, he did not die, but was released again after his death. Through the motions of the law he was hung on high at the appointed time. At that moment the earth shook and the mountains erupted. Because the Messiah was hung up on high, he begged to be given firm existence again. It is all as written. The first people to be inspired by Jesus' message were almost all Jews, but within a decade after the crucifixion, non-Jews were being converted, and the burgeoning faith was spreading out to the great cosmopolitan centers of the Roman Empire. In particular, it was spreading into areas where Syriac and Greek were the dominant languages. Jesus' native tongue was Aramaic, a version of the Syriac language, although he would have read Hebrew and probably a few words of Greek. But the Gospels and all the books of the New Testament were written in Greek, the international language of the time. In Antioch, a city in the Roman Empire that was nonetheless oriented toward the east and the great trade routes of the Silk Road, Christians were first called Christians. From here, the church went north and west into the heartland of the Roman Empire, and simultaneously east and south into the Persian Empire. Until the 4th century, Christianity was a small but growing faith that achieved considerable success in the Roman Empire in spite of several severe persecutions. Outside the Roman Empire, the faith grew more slowly in places such as Persia and India. By 300, there were Christian communities from England to India and from Egypt to north of the Black Sea. The early church is often spoken of as it were only as a monolithic institution. In reality, however, the church grew in different ways and as the result of diverse forces. The early church experimented with incorporating local beliefs, mythologies, and practices according to the area in which it took root. Gradually, versions of the Christ story that had common elements coalesced and were defined into standard Christian teaching, and those that were too radical or heretical were banished or resisted. The ideal of one church is a historical invention of the 4th and 5th centuries, after the Western Church had become the faith of the Roman Empire, and the empire became known as holy. Right from the start, personality clashes and differences of opinion occurred over the meaning and significance of the Jesus story. The apostles Paul and Peter in particular clashed vigorously. Peter was Peter was by nature more Eastern and cautious, more caught up with tradition and history. Paul had been fashioned by the Greek West and the interaction between Judaism and Greek philosophy. He wanted to create a new faith, more radical, more unusual, and not bound by tradition. Besides disputes among its founders, the early church was also bedeviled by theological and practical disagreements. How Jewish should the church be? Was Jesus more divine than human? Did the Old Testament have any place in Christianity? Was the material world evil or good or indifferent? Early Christianity, from the 1st to early 4th century, had no formal creed and quite consciously drew on models of belief that it found around it. For example, it adapted the Roman veneration of the sun to its own schedule of worship. The day of the Roman week dedicated to the sun, the day on which Jesus rose from the dead, was turned into Sunday, the day of church services. East, where the sun rose, became the direction of church buildings, whose altars were placed at the east end, and December 25th, the sun's birthday, became the birthday of Jesus. Beginning in the 4th century, church historians and teachers presented a view of the early church as a single ship plowing its way steadily through the tempestuous seas of the pagan world, buffeted by winds and storms of heresy, but nevertheless always finding the true path. Perhaps a better analogy would be to see the early church as a series of small boats, setting off from different places,